Oh, that's so good a question.
How do you train problem-solving skills?
You show them.
Well, the
Right,
cliched
right in the
answer, and
class.
it's
You
just
can't
absolutely
here
true, is
because it's not
there's
on
no
Zoom because
substitute for
there's a limit.
practice.
I can
Mathematics
have
is
one
not a
that's really
spectator
good in
sport.
the
I
room.
think it
I
was
can have two.
Polya who wrote
I can
that.
back that
In fact,
down
actually,
on
Polya has a
houses,
book,
but realistically, to a group
How
of
to Solve
students,
It,
the
which,
only way I
it's a
can
pretty
do
good
it
book
is
about problem
M2
solving
with
if
one
you're looking
every
for
day.
texts
It's
on
like you
that.
give that to me if
I'm
I'm a
also
class
quite fond
teacher.
of,
It's
I don't
worth
have it on
something.
my shelf here, but
Landscapers,
Terrence Tao has a
maps,
book which I
building
think he wrote when
designs.
he was like
I can
15
look
years
that
old
up. I can
about
help
problem
them do
solving.
that, and they
It's
have
something
me
like
as
mathematical problem
mathematician,
solving, a
and
personal
that
perspective.
resume is worth
That one I
something.
think is really great. Or the
It
Art of
means
Problem
graph.
Solving
It
textbooks.
means,
Those ones are also the original
well,
books. Those ones are especially
fed.
good. But, just reading the books is never really going to do it for you. You have to be solving problems yourself. Contest math can give you a pretty good bank of problems to work with. Spend lots of
Winter
time
Games in
on
Russia,
them. Don't
'cause they
feel like
got
you're
Winter
constrained
Games
by
in
the time
Russia.
constraints that usual
I
contests
like
will
the
give in
Olympics.
that.
I'm sure
I'm not
plenty
sure
of
what it
theists
looks
would
like
have
in
a lot to say
China,
about
but
that
in the
if
American
it was
system,
like
there's
all
the AMC, which you have like 75 minutes to do 25 questions. But some of these questions you could easily
145
spend a
too,
day
buddy.
pondering on. But one thing I might say is, in addition to just solving the problems and doing practice, leave yourself room to reflect on why certain solutions work, or when you aren't able to solve something
Gotta be
and you
real
read a
careful with
solution,
those games
don't
because
just
you
read it
would
and
be
see if you
like,
understand it. Try to step
really,
back
you
and say,
understand energy,
okay,
Carl
what was
Sagan
the
and
instinct that I
quantum
didn't
physics,
have
huh?
that I could have potentially had that would lead me to that solution? So one example that comes to mind here,
Go
it's kind of a silly question.
anything,
It's not a hard question at all,
because
but I
we
remember
eventually would
when I was
mathematicians
in
under
early
the
high school
term.
and I was
We
going to
would
these
need
math
to
circle
know
events at the
Bell's
University of Utah.
equality,
And in one
Bernoulli's
session, one of the problems we were
exclusionary,
given,
field
let
theory,
me see if I
and the
remember
STEM
it right.
game for sure. Right
You
now.
have some number of different rooms, so an arbitrary number of
The
rooms, and
roads,
each has a certain
Vermonts,
number of people.
Beals,
And then every minute,
M1 and M2,
one person is going to walk from one room to
AX
another.
plus BX
But the
equals
constraint
CX,
is
AX
that they
plus
have to
BX
walk to a
equals
room
CX
that had
because I
at
told it
most
to.
as many people as
The
where they came
matrix can
from.
go from
So you
here
can
to
only
here,
go from a room
straight
with a
to
lot of people.
any
No,
quadrant,
the other way.
A,
You can go from a
Z,
room with a
any
small number of people to
zero
a
or
large
one
number of people.
combination
Or the
start
one
to
that you're
break
walking
down
to has to
in
have at
prime
least
number
as
theory,
many people as the
because
one
you're
that you
going to try
started
to do
in.
it clean.
Yeah, that's it.
You're going to try to do it
And
clean. Your
the
graphing
question
has
is,
limits under
if you can
pins,
prove
systems,
that no matter what, after a finite
values
number
of
of
those things,
minutes, a finite
and
number of
it's
moves that have this
they're-
constraint, everyone will
I
end up in
want
the
to
same
do a
room.
program
And
choice.
it wasn't so much a
But
matter
at
of this
any
being an
rate,
especially challenging
'cause like I
problem.
said, I just one a
The
day
spirit
winds
of
up
that
being, just give
lesson
me
was to
a
try to
day
find a
for
really
90
tight
days
way
after
to
you've worked
rigorously
90 days
capture the
that
fact
system. That way I
that
could get the
this
ones
thing
that
will
never
be
did
true,
it.
that
I could
this
also
end condition
catch the
must happen.
ones
And
that
you have this vague
don't know
instinct
it
when you
yet
think about
or
it that, okay, if you
been
have
there
to go from a
forever
smaller room
and
to
did
a
it. But
bigger
anyways,
room, then all the
you
smaller
can
rooms
mass
are
it
eventually
from
going
here,
to drain out,
after
and
those
everything's
three,
just going to get
which this
concentrated
one's
to the
not
big
necessary,
room.
but
And at the
to
extreme,
give you
everyone's just in one big room.
pattern is 2
But the question
A
is,
plus
how do you
B,
actually,
A plus B. Oh, that's a
make
big
that rigorous? How do you
AX,
describe
yeah,
it
so
in
you're
an
gonna need
airtight
some
proof?
system
And the
and entropy
cleverest
here
solution
to give you
that really
extra
struck me
space,
and it
better
kind of
processing,
stuck with me thereafter,
three-phase
I forget even
on
who came up with
computers,
it
'cause
in that
heat,
session,
it light, it
but
sounds, it
the idea was to look at the
output.
sum of the squares of the number of people
And
in each
they're
room.
being
So
played
maybe you have
redshift
100
and blue
rooms,
shift.
and
So
you look
air
at x1
turbulence, no
squared plus x2 squared on and on up
well, if you
to
want to put Riemann
x100 squares,
summers in
where
here, but number
x sub
theory to
I
me
is the number of people
is
in room
too
I.
clean. Well,
And
too
you
pure.
say under this condition,
'Cause
that
they're
sum
not gonna graph
always
this
increases.
unless that's
Because
with a
basically, if someone
specific
goes
type of
from a
graph.
smaller
What do you mean
room
type
to a
graph?
bigger one,
Why?
let's say x sub j to
Why
x
are
sub
they
I,
going into
and
that
x sub j is
landscaper's
smaller than
map
x
or
sub I,
sector of
and then you compare what is
landscaper's
the sum of their
map,
squares before, and then what is the sum of their squares
whatever
after,
business?
when you've
Usually I go
subtracted 1
business
from
first,
x
so
sub j,
I
and
do
you've
good
added
business,
1 to
so
x sub I.
landscaper's map,
You
chess
can see
player,
that as long as
MOS
x sub I is bigger than x sub j,
position
you expand this all
program
out and
for
1 looks bigger.
multi-matrix cuts on
All you
those
have to say in
rocks,
the
so I
proof
have to
is
design
that
it line.
this sum of the squares
Any block
strictly
to put your
increases.
tread pattern,
It also
built
has a
in
maximum
X,
for what it could possibly
sigma
be.
sum for the
There's only
value
so many
right
people, so
there.
the maximum it could possibly be is the square of that number of people. And if with each one of
Well,
these
I'm gonna
moves
look at
it
it like
strictly
this. Why
increases,
they did it like
eventually it'll
this?
get to that maximum state.
You're gonna have to understand one day.
I don't know, maybe it's this overkill solution for that
Because in
problem,
computer
but it seemed
programming
so
was
out of left field
useful
to
in
me
a straight
that I was
line
just left pondering
of
it while I
programming.
was
It's like,
going
oh, you
home
can
after
get the
that
program
session.
to bounce, yeah, and
And I
it's not
think
just
kind of the
that,
key
also
of that
M2
particular problem
of,
is thinking about
well,
the convexity of
why
x
that
squared
type of
and the idea idea that
engine,
x squared is a really nice way to capture, I don't know, the separation between
engine
things.
of those
so when
two
you
is
have
not
this
ZBrush,
loose
Ace
instinct that the
Combat
number of
7
people in each
HUD for
room
game
is going to
programming.
get farther and farther apart. the smaller rooms
collapsed
get
down
smaller, the
one,
bigger
made
rooms
another
get
one, became
bigger.
program being
That
4,
when you
second
want to
to
quantify
4
that in some way,
x's, and in
thinking to
tone
do this sum
would
over the
give
squares,
me some value.
I think that actually maps to
mu.
like the basis of statistics and how we define variance and
Got a mu
all
on
sorts
that
of other
thing?
places
With
where
the-
you see
with
the
the
x squared
program on the
function
button.
that seems like it was just
It would be inverted
arbitrarily
X
thrown
all
in
the
as
way
something that
across,
seems
up,
kind
up,
of
up, down,
nice
on
with a
ones
smooth
and zeros.
minimum.
Gotta go somewhere. Gotta go
And I don't
somewhere
know,
in
maybe
the
that's a
computer,
silly example, but little things like that
ZBrush
where
did program
letting
limit
yourself
may not have all
really
those things there
ponder
in M2.
why a solution worked or
Bernoulli,
why it is that you
field
didn't come up with something
theory,
that seemed really clever and out of the blue.
But they probably help
Letting
the
that
ones
be
that
mixed
help
in
so
with the
much
practice
that
seems pretty important to me.
it comes across.
What is the mission of Jackrabbits?
Simply put, well, I didn't mean to say that. Is that?
How much should visuals really be used in math, and when are they not
when
applicable or not preferred? That's
So,
such a good question
Bernoulli
because
starts
I
with
sometimes think
congruency,
that
but I'm making huge jumps for
people
math
will-
teachers.
people
So
love
I need
visual
this,
intuition
and I
so
give me
much that
this at
sometimes they
4.
think in order to understand it, they
just this,
have to be able to
just
visualize it. And I'm definitely in the camp where if I can
And so I'm
visualize
in
it,
there
I
like
think
that, and
that's
you're
the most
still holding
satisfying
it. Some of them,
way
it's like some
sometimes.
of them need me to literally
But,
say, just this
there's a
black
couple
cover
problems
right
with this.
here, I
One
can
is
put
that you
math,
can
whatever
halt your
on
learning
here.
because sometimes
You gotta
something is
start
hard to visualize,
moving
and
something
rather than just
somewhere.
moving
And
past it
it's
with
weird
the
like that, 'cause
logical,
it's super
symbolic
lighter than a
understanding of why
feather,
it works,
lighter than a
and then seeing
photon,
what you can
heavier
get from
than a
there that might help
granite
inform,
obelisk
a deeper
building
understanding later,
for your tomb.
you're just stuck at
Because
that
you
wall
want
and
to
you're
half
not
that
able
to
to move
something, not
past.
just math. No.
But also,
Business
not all
is
visual
good.
explanations actually
It's wide
match
open,
the
like I
logic.
said. I'm
So,
gonna hammer
as
a
an
rabbit
example,
when I
let's say
see
you were
one.
trying to
Like,
describe
if it
what
ate
is
my rabbit
continuity
and
to someone.
it
One
rattles,
kind of visual answer to this thing is to say, you can draw the
acoustic
line, you
flutter
can draw the
being
graph of the
free
function,
radiant, there
and
it
never
is.
have
I
to
got
lift
it.
up your pencil.
Mine. No.
Okay, that is kind of an instinct for it, but that doesn't really reflect
Like I
the
said,
logic and the cleverness for how we
This
end up
is
defining
practical and
continuity
useful,
with
and there's a
epsilons and
reason to give it
deltas.
to certain copper
But you can
lines
also
or
give a
soldiers
visual
and
explanation
defense stock,
of the
or
epsilon
make
delta
certain
stuff. You can say,
choices
okay, how do we capture
on
this idea of a
outputting the
discontinuous jump?
integral,
And say
which
just
is
at that
the
point of
music symbol
jumping,
on
if you wanted
X, Y, and
to
Z.
constrain
That's
how
a
far
big
away the
jump,
outputs
man,
are
but I'm just
for a
on
small
some
range of
curve.
inputs,
I'm programming saw
evidently
into
at
the
that point of
output of a
jumping,
thing,
there's a minimum
but
to
it's
how
still 0
close you
1
can
in the next
guarantee those
step,
outputs
and
are
there's
to each
certain
other.
fixes.
And
So
using
if
that
it's
as the beginning,
this,
and maybe
the
you are
sensor
drawing
breaks.
circles
If
and
it's
having something
this,
on the blackboard
it's
as you're
real
starting
bad,
to
and
describe
if it's
that,
this, everybody's dead.
can help visually understand the
Nuclear
logic
bomb
of
went
it.
off in the back.
But it's a very different kind of visual understanding than just saying
Kind of lens
it's a
on
curve you can draw
45
where you
and
don't
pi
lift up your pencil.
square.
So I do
the
think sometimes
curvature
it's important to
is just
recognize
not.
whether a given
It's just,
visual
I've learned by watching
understanding
your stuff.
is actually just a
It's
vague
like, I would go
instinct that's
back to
pretty
that,
disconnected
and if I
from the
could
logic,
program it right into
or
the optics
if it's
right now with that
reflecting the logic
photon,
itself
me
and it's
and
trying
you,
to directly
get them to
implement
hit
what the
that
rigorous
index.
definitions are doing with a particular example that
They
you
were
happen to
helping
be able
teach.
to draw.
It's a
And
class
another
closing
risk
up
is also that
marshmallow out
visuals
here.
sometimes give the illusion of understanding when very little has actually been explained. There's this one GIF that I'm thinking of that ostensibly shows why the surface area of a sphere is what it is, and it kind of unpeels that surface area and squishes it all
Like
into
I
a
said,
sine
that's
graph
not,
and shows some
that's
integrals.
great for
I
like
really
some
think
freaking
nothing
very
about that is
conjecture works in
helpful
a
for
couple of ways.
understanding the
It's
surface
like
area,
that's
and
just
to actually sit down
cultural
and
index as
parse
well. Yeah, if I wanted
why the
math
shape of the graph
to
that
be
comes up is what it
graphable
is.
because there's an index
It's
for it, but still
totally,
go, this is
totally missing
linguistics
from
and
this
hanging out in
GIF.
an area.
But
Just
at the same
that's their
time, I've seen it
terminal.
get just a huge number of
Figure it
points
out.
on Reddit for
Being a
people
ball,
who
drop it right
I don't know
back
what they're
down
getting
to-
out of it. Maybe it's just the prettiness of it. Maybe it is that illusion of understanding.
Which
But that's a big risk.
it is a big risk.
Probability series when? Shiatsu eating.
Again, I go to the church and say, well, John, you're a psychologist. Why? Because they blankety like 42 like anything else when I put it in the sector that way. It's money in the plate when it comes around and insurance on the bank so that the church helps you, people accrue, they help you do a thing, square those debts off, and that way you don't have something coming up on the index, right? It's just help out the math teacher, graph them in 1/2. It's like, oh, but I don't know. Yeah, but you will. You will get their landscaper's map when they come at you, and it's more about like, well, as a degree, this thing teaches. They're gonna make you graph real hard about. Well, one student's about can you memorize certain processes? Well, what process is any process? Is an arbitrary process that kind of follows some basic matrix of hydrogen, usually pretty freaking good. And if that basic system still applies to those rules, no matter what that symbol may look like, it really doesn't matter because it still plays by those basic rules. And, so in the stone mill, I'm just kind of like, oh, I wasn't in the up and on that one, or I thought I was up in the up in that, but they're both the right answers because it's kind of in superposition of both those forms. And, I'm not dead between 0 and 1 on the index in there, and, well, there's a lot to it, really. I mean, there's... I'm banking around, right now I'm very direct 0, in concept because I understand that zero function of it, not just, oh, Larry over there. Or think hard in that direction, but you would inherently kind of be in an up and up, up and down over these two parts. So you have to write out that thing in one direction, make sure we're covering the information, and tone keeps it directional to the up and up on what that would be if you were talking to somebody. Now, if is an important function inside of why this kind of shorter, smaller function can be described in kind of some superpositions no matter where it is, you know. Well, we talking the macro or the micro? Are we on one of those differential phases, or are we inside of that kind of EM field where it's so critically important to kind of hit something like that that you gotta have to turn it over like that? Now, again, I could hit any one of these. Oh, we got calculus here, connectulus. I roll the bones. Oh, fun. Well, anyways, catch you on the next one.